Hello, my name is Miro Roman. I'm an architect and a scholar. I did my PhD at ETH in Zurich and the chair for digital architectonics in an environment, in a group, in a beautiful group, which was fostered by Ludwig and Miro Roman. And there I fell in love with information technologies. So with the ways in which information technologies, the connectivity of data, the abundance of data, in the ways they challenge the way how we think about the world, or how we used to think about the world, or they in a way bring a different way how we can think about concepts. So how can we imagine, or how can I imagine, how can I write if I have all the books in the world at my disposal? How can I take pictures if pictures are all around me? How does this abundance and connectivity challenge the way in which I think about the world and architecture in it together? What I think is interesting with data is that the more data we have, so we can always kind of cut it, trim it, stretch it, we can squeeze it and play with it in a way. And the more we have, it will not show us the world as it is in a scientific and objective way, but it will show us the world we want to see. And how to think of this. This is something which we might call today fake news. But I think this is a more interesting story. So if we think that we are in a conversation with it, then it's not any more objective. So it's in between me and this set of data or this object that I'm looking. Then it's a kind of a conversation, a mood, an atmosphere. It's a way of probing and testing and thinking and trying to figure out what I want to do with it, learning from it and so on. And in this way, it challenges the idea that data shows the objectivity of the world. And with this in mind, I started to write my PhD. So I wanted to write about information and architecture conceptually by having all the books in the world. And of course, when I started to play with it, with machine learning, machine intelligence, and so on, scraping of data, books and concepts became alive. But what I think is that somehow and in a way they were always alive. So if we take the word data or concept of data, or the idea of data, and we look at it etymology, it will take us for a ride. It will take us on some kind of a time travel. So we see how through time the idea of data is changing. So the idea of data is a kind of a date, it's a kind of a datum, it's a kind of a chronology, it becomes time. So from data, we come easily through time, to time. So this is a kind of a journey through time. On the other hand, the word time in some languages is a synonym for the word weather. So this would be another kind of traveling. I would say it's a traveling, how concepts travel through space. So they change their or morph their meanings and ideas through space in a certain time. So this is in a way thinking about concepts as alive. But what happens with information technologies is that we can synthesize context for this data. So if I put the idea of data in one library, surrounded with a certain set of books, it will tell me one story, and if I put it in another library, it will tell me another story. The same thing happens with books. So for instance, if we take a book, like let's take Le Corbusier, and towards a new architecture. And if we put this book in a library in which are only books about biology, then Le Corbusier will show his most prominent concept. This book will show its most prominent concepts. And they're going to be most probably the most common architectural words and ideas, concepts. So it will be architecture, it will be a city, a house, a wall, a window, things like this. If we, on the other hand, let Le Corbusier towards a new architecture travel to another library, to another galaxy of concepts, it will tell a different story. So if it's now in a library, which is a library of books about architecture, Le Corbusier has 10 books of architecture because this is a character, this book now talks. And in this constellation, it will tell us a different story. So its most prominent concepts are not going to be the standard architectural words, but they're going to become, for instance, a sea liner, a temple, industrialization, a car, and so on. These are going to be the words Le Corbusier towards the new architecture is going to use to distinguish itself from its friends. And by traveling to another galaxy and another galaxy and another galaxy, this book will slowly start to tell stories which were not imagined by the author itself. So it will in a way grow, and through this growing and through this conversation, I will learn from the book, and the book will get new ideas and new ways of talking. And I think a very similar thing happened to Vitruvius' 10 books on architecture that travel to time, and in every different context, it starts to tell a different story. So it's a kind of a time traveler, a book which is a time traveler. What is beautiful there is that the books start to talk and grow, and they talk about things which are not directly in themselves. So they are always relative to a specific context, to a specific database, to a specific environment. And I think this is something which is very beautiful and very challenging to think. And in this sense, these books and concepts become alive. They have their own intelligence, but their intelligence is not the intelligence that you and me have. It's a different kind of intelligence which requires a different kind of talking. And one of the leitmotifs for me when I started writing my PhD was the interview that Umberto Eco gave in Spiegel, where he talked about the idea of an alien visiting planet Earth and then asking the people, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, asking the people, what is water? And then a scientist comes and says, water is H2O. But then for Galen, this is not really much. So one oxygen and 2 hydrogen atoms. But if we try to answer this from an informational perspective, then the water becomes life. The water becomes blood. The water becomes a lake, a sea, a river, a stream, an ice cube, a steam, a soup, a drink. Water becomes a kind of a cultural phenomenon, an element, a ritual, and so on. It becomes so much more than what the scientist said. And what information technology brings is that we can start computationally work with it. And even more, if we create different libraries or different environments for this water, we can have very specific profiles of it. We can have the river profile of water, we can have, for instance, the wine profile of water, and so on. So again, these concepts, in a way, become alive. And the other thing, what was very interesting and inspiring for me, by working with computation, with machine learning, with this idea that objects are alive, and with coding, was to think of coding, which was common to the whole group I was working in, is to think of coding as a kind of a literacy. So we call it a digital literacy, which means that coding is not only the thing that you use to optimize things, to make this machining and industrial work, but coding becomes a kind of writing, a kind of thinking, which opens a new spectrum of possibilities. So you can write with it a text, an SMS, a poem, a novel, a letter, or an email. So literacy brings a kind of an open spectrum how to work with information. And I think this, to think of coding as a literacy is a beautiful way to think about the world in which we are living today. So this was a little bit about my inspiration and how I was dealing with my PhD. Thank you very much.